I, like most people, like a good mystery, and a good investigation into it, where some take us down a rabbit hole that seems to never end. In this episode of Retro Dark Mysteries, we are taking a look at the mystery surrounding this SNES game, Secret of Evermore. The year was 1994, and Square, the American office of Japanese company Squaresoft, had an idea for creating a game of a boy and his dog traveling through worlds based on B-movies and riddled with pop culture references. And when Squaresoft heard of the idea, they began to start work on the concept. However, one thing had to be made clear, and that it was to be made for American gamers. The original working title was Vex and the Murmurs, but it soon became The Secret of Evermore, when the name Evermore was a winning submission at a game naming contest. So before we get into the legend, I feel that we need to go over the plot of the game. The game has you play two characters. One is a boy and the other is his dog. You live in the small town of Podunk, and one night as the two of you are leaving the movie theater, the dog chases a cat and then ends up running into an abandoned mansion, where you come across a weird machine that starts up and suddenly transports you both to some strange place, where you are greeted by two people. One is an assistant to Professor Ruffledge, and then are suddenly rushed into an escape pod after defeating two robots with a bazooka. The escape pod then crashes into the planet below, and thus begins the adventure. Now on to the reason I put Secrets of Evermore into the gaming urban legend category, and that is the original game was actually darker than the version that came out. Yes, granted, one can say maybe the Japanese version was that, but unlike most games that came out for the Super NES at the time, Secrets of Evermore was never released in Japan at all. It was solely released in the States. So what is the true secret of this game? Was it supposed to be a darker game than what we got? Well, to answer that question, I had to dig deeper than I ever had done before to find the true answer, and I ended up finding an old Reddit post from about 11 years ago, where someone had actually asked that in the r/gaming subreddit, and apparently one of the lead programmers of the game came forward to tell his side of the story. But before we get to that, let's go back a bit to where the rumor came out. The story goes like this. During the game's creation, there was supposedly a contest held in order to find a writer for the story, and someone named Ed Kahn had won the contest and was soon hired on to help create the game, using the story he had written that was supposedly darker than what we got. However, at some point he had left the development team just before the game was released, and no one knows why. Plus, if you look at the credits of the game, Ed Kahn is not even mentioned at all. One rumor of why he left the company was that he had been fired for not producing any useful content for the game, which makes sense since after leaving the team he supposedly went on to write a story called The Noise Coming from Inside Children, and since the game was made to be more family friendly, the use of such a dark story was clearly out of place. All this comes from an old blogspot post from 2010 where the author was doing a story of the game at the time, and he had contacted the mysterious Ed Kahn and had emailed him to find out more about his involvement of the game, which read, "That's actually an old issue they had, this group of new hires, mostly young people taking care of the creative side. They had a lot more control than you usually see over development. Occasionally we would get a note or request from them to change an aspect or the aspect of the game, and we're asked to honor those requests if possible." The author of the blog then asked about the art style of the game, and this is what he had gotten. One thing that bothered me, and a lot of people on the team, was a lack of communication across the board. They kind of seemed like their own club, and we were never sure where things were going. One example is, and I'm not sure where this came from, but we were always talking about how this was a darker kind of game, and how this was the feel we were going for, etc. Though they say that, I'm really not sure where it came from, or why we thought that, but that was always just the feel of things. The impression we got from the lead writers, designers, then we played the the gold release of the first time, just months before launch, and it was this kid's game with quirky jokes, and a lot of us were surprised. At the end of it all, he had said that everyone on the team were very talented and that he had asked not to be mentioned. Which brings us back to that old Reddit post with the comment from one of the lead programmers of the game itself, which read, "Hi, I am Brian Federer, the lead programmer of Evermore. This article is, at best, a flight of fancy. I was the first hire on the Evermore team and was there until the Richmond office closed in 1996. There was no Ed Kahn on the team. Furthermore, I am deliberately misquoted in the article about 3/4 of the way down. The original and correct text can be found here," and he posted a link. In an interview Colby Dillard did with me a year or two back. It was a fun article, but it was a fun little article, but a complete fiction. Take it for what it is. However, Brian had mentioned that he was misquoted in the article and gave a link to his response. However, when I clicked on the link, it led me to look like an adult site, so we will never know what was actually said in it. Well, now we're on to the question of, was Ed Kahn real? I mean, yes, from the Reddit comment from the lead programmer of the game saying that there was no Ed Kahn involved in the game, but if you were to Google who was Ed Kahn, you would get sites dedicated to finding out any info on Ed Kahn, or the book he supposedly wrote. One of the sites had an author by the name of Lucia Peters who wrote, "There's a story out there with a deliciously bizarre title of The Noise Coming from Inside Children, written by a little-known author by the name of Ed Kahn. It's widely considered to be, by those who have read it, to be one of the most disturbing pieces of fiction ever conceived. It didn't drive anyone mad just because they read it, or anything. It did, however, receive such backlash at its initial publication for its horrific content that it was never reprinted, and as a result gained quite a reputation. It's thought to be one of the horror genre's greatest and rarest works. I mean, consider the title alone, The Noise Coming from Inside Children. If that isn't the perfect title of a spooky story, I don't know what is. It's everything weird and unsettling, and all rolled up in one simple turn of phrase. It's a title that makes me want to desperately want to read the story it's attached to, except that I can't. We don't know where it is, or, and here is the next layer of the tale, whether it actually exists at all." So here's what we know so far. Ed Kahn and his book exists or existed, and that it was supposedly one of the most disturbing reads ever created, and that it was one of the horror genre's rarest finds. Lucia wanted to say that she had first heard of the book on a listicle post on What Culture, and that the story was originally written in a small-town newspaper in the 1970s, and that Ed Kahn became somewhat of a cult legend with one of his earlier works titled In Concrete Basements. The Noise That Comes from Inside Children was a follow-up to that work, and was much anticipated, but however its release didn't go as planned. With Lucia stating in her blog, "People complained, but not because the story wasn't effective. If anything, it was too effective. It was, in fact, so effective that the only surviving review of it, which described it as desperately difficult to finish, called for the relabeling of horror as a genre in its entirety." I'll be honest and admit that I did something no critic should ever do. I started the story with the intention of giving it a positive review. I desperately wanted to be the voice of dissent, and also wanted to show people that there's value in that which so effectively disturbs and disgruntles us. I, as fans of horror, should recognize that more than anything else. But I cannot give The Noises That Come from Inside Children a good review, because I hated it. After reading that review, Lucia went on to say this: "If you read those few paragraphs and thought, gee, that's not much of a review, you'd be absolutely right. It's more of a reaction or response to the work, rather than an assessment. The words have power, and those particular words have more power than most. She goes on to say that she wanted to find out who Ed Kahn was, or is, and when she did a quick Google search, she came across a blog titled, "Who is Ed Kahn?" Which now brings us back to the start of this mystery, of the legend of Ed Kahn and his connection with the game Secret of Evermore. True or not, I will link the blog post in the description to spare you from hearing me try to read it all, but I recommend reading it all the way through and all the comments, because one comment on it now gives us somewhat of a clue to solving this mystery. An unknown commenter on us stated that he went on an exhausted Google search and he stumbled upon a website that speaks of a tabletop game named Blue House, the Mystery on the Hill, and that Ed Kahn is mentioned as the writer. But that is where he left it, wanting the blogger to respond, even offering to help solve it with him. Well, after reading most of all the stuff on the game, and the legend of his creation and who Ed Kahn was, or is, I have come to this conclusion. We'll never know. It's kind of like trying to see how many licks it takes to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop. As I've stated at the start of this is one of the rabbit holes that kept going deeper and deeper and deeper, and I feel that it is time for me to try to climb out of it. So after exhausted searching and reading, I feel that the Secret of Evermore is like an urban legend. It may have some truth to it, but really it's all just a cleverly made up story. A good one, but still just a story. If you ever played this game, or have the game in your collection at home, let me know down in the comments. I'm Paul saying peace out and stay frosty.